when we feel good, we have a really solid skill on board for when we do feel triggered. And that's when we can start to have this letting go process, getting momentum and actually work.
I gotta get myself a little more faith, a little more love.
I'm your host, Krista Bigler, and I'm going to guess we have at least one thing in common, that we're both in pursuit of a less stressed life. On this show, I'll be interviewing experts and sharing clinical pearls from my years of practice to support high-performing, health-savvy women in pursuit of abundance and a less stressed life. One of my beliefs is that we always have options for getting the results we want. So let's see what's out there together. All right, today on The Less Stressed Life, I have Jen Johannsen. She's a dentist by profession, but a self-development nerd by passion. She's passionate about several topics, including financial freedom, time freedom, and emotional freedom, but also endlessly fascinated about how we can shift ourselves internally and we radically change our perceptions and experiences. She believes that much of our interaction with the world around us, and I agree with her, is filtered through the lens of our often negative mental chatter. And so through a combination of medical knowledge, tools for nervous system regulation, and a lot of trial and error, she's improved her baseline mood and has teachable tools to share. She feels really compelled to just pay it forward. So if something that she has come across that has really helped her, helps others, then it's a win. So I met Jen in a little professional group online, and I saw she was very interested. I saw she was a professional, very interested in nervous system health. So I just reached out to her and was like, I too, on like a 4-year experimental journey of all the nervous system things. And she was like, yes, we could be friends. And so that's how we landed in this conversation. So Jen, what's interesting, you guys have a little bit of a fun family history. I met your sister because I hosted a breathwork session in the group that she was in. So I met your sister, Kristen. You're both dentists. Your dad's a dentist.
Yes.
But you practice not all week long and not with them. So tell us about that and what you're doing now. And then let's get into your story a little bit and the fascination of nervous system work.
Sure. Yeah. My sister and I are both dentists. I had gone to college in Central Virginia and decided to stay. I'll get to this in a minute, but I struggled with seasonal depression growing up. Warmer and sunnier climate definitely excited me. But I've just been so motivated to cut back my hours over time to be able to live life on my own terms. And that has involved becoming debt-free. That's involved, as I've had my children, I now work 2 days a week. And we chose an area with a lower cost of living on purpose, but I have had the time and the bandwidth to now try different things, see what works, see what doesn't work. And yeah, if anything I have to share works for someone else, that would feel great.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, like you, I've been on a 4-year journey with experimenting with nervous system modalities. And so I think we're going to talk about some different tools. I always think people's stories is the most interesting thing about them. You were telling me a little bit before we hit record about how you developed a fascination with nervous system, and it is with relatable parts of the story. So just take us back to wherever you want when how this all started for you.
Sure. We were chatting before the call, I was talking about my childhood. I experienced some normal ups and downs as well as some more extreme ones. I started to struggle with seasonal depression from about ages 12 to 17 or so. And then when I was 17, I also experienced the death of a young family member. And it was the lowest low I've ever felt. But when I was 15, that summer, a really strange thing happened. I experienced what I would describe as a heightened awareness and this really just pervasive sense of peace. And I really feel like I experienced life without that often negative mental chatter that we tend to see the world through as humans. I felt like I could show up as what other people needed in the moment. And as a 15-year-old girl, I felt remarkably good about my physical self. For over a decade, I wrote this off as a fluke, but another low in my late 20s led me to really question it. When I was about 28, I was a few years out of dental school. My husband and I had hustled to pay off debt. We had well over 6 figures of student loans. We had just gotten married and purchased our home. And there was nothing else externally that I felt really motivated to work for. But I struggled with these mysterious dark moods a lot. I felt insecure a lot of the time, both personally and professionally. And I had these days where I would feel crippling anxiety and other times that it would completely evaporate. And it was insanely frustrating. For the past 8 or so years, I've been on this journey of what I would call a deconstruction and reconstruction of self. And by that, I really questioned what that experience was that summer. And if it was something that I could learn to harness more intentionally and sustainably. I've come a really long way. So this process has involved examining beliefs and patterns and insecurities. It's involved getting really honest with myself about my own quirks and pitfalls and ways that I self-sabotage. And it's involved asking for feedback. And as scary as this has been at times, it's been so worth it because I think the biggest thing I've learned is that when we really can be consciously present with a really uncomfortable emotion, it starts to dissipate pretty quickly. But there's some caveats and there's some other things we'll talk about as we go. But the biggest caveat is I am not a licensed mental health professional, and I absolutely have experienced depression in a way that you can't just turn off or shift out of. So there's absolutely physiological factors besides I'm going to touch on today.
Okay, cool. So I'm intrigued by this 15-year-old Jen, right? That had this almost divine intervention of seeing the world differently. And then you were able to remember that a decade later. Would you say your late 20s was when you started on this journey, that 8-year journey?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yep. I would say I was 28 when I was questioning things, 29 when I started to really get traction or find tools. And then I'm 37 now. Nervous system learning started during the pandemic.
Okay, got it. For me, I've just experimented with lots of tools to see what could help me because I was observing that nervous system stuff was holding my clients back from like true resilience and healing for the long haul. And so I also I'm not unlike my clients actually. And so I found that I was just going through those modalities to see what I thought of them. I'm curious if you found mentors, guides, inspiration, what that kind of looked like, how that started to unfold.
Yeah. So I met someone by chance in 2018 who became a holistic therapist for me for many years. I still see her, but it's maybe once every few months just to stay in balance. She was the person who I ended up learning about the map of consciousness from, but she just became this guide for me of what you experienced was real. Other people experience it too. She introduced me to Dr. David Hawkins, who's the person who came up with the map of consciousness. He describes a very similar experience at a much younger child. I want to say he was under the age of 5, but can remember really well. I had heard of Eckhart Tolle, but I wasn't super familiar with his work until I started seeing her. But he also describes a very similar experience that happened in his late 20s and stayed, which is atypical for a lot of people. Learning to heal these things or step out of our unconscious patterns is a thing that happens in bits and spurts and 1 step forward and 2 steps back. But yeah, her name is Jane. She's been a really wonderful influence for me.
Beautiful.
And I've also done EMDR recently. So I'll just throw that in. But in terms of somatic healing work, an EMDR practitioner had a really wonderful experience with that.
So you bring up the map of consciousness and Dr. David Hawkins. Will you go over that with us? What is the map of consciousness?
Yes. So I call it my framework for everything. I'm going to recommend that if somebody's listening to it, that they look it up. It's going to come up online in rainbow colors, but it's a blend of science and spirituality, and it gives us practical tools for releasing tough emotions. Now, there is a point that I got stuck with that until I had the nervous system learning on board. So we can circle back to that at the end. But it's a map of the entire human experience. At the bottom of the map is shame. Then as we move up from there, we have guilt, apathy, grief, fear, desire. And that one I always found interesting because when we are desiring something, it can feel good, but it's actually a disempowered state, like a thing that we want almost has the power over us. Anger and pride. And then there's this sort of tipping point of neutrality. And then we get into the more life-giving emotions, more optimistic hedge spaces we can exist in. Courage, willingness, acceptance, reason. And then there's this other tipping point. We get into the spiritual paradigm, which is love, not the type of love that we think of. Typically, this is like love in a complete absence of fear. This is like this completely unconditional type of state. So we have love, joy, peace, and enlightenment. So when we are on the lower half of the school scale, we are in our ego. We're concerned about competition. We're usually in a headspace of lack and fear, and we feel contracted, and we often have an inaccurate perception of reality. And then when we're in the upper half of the scale, we feel more abundant. We can usually roll with the flow of our day and handle curveballs really well. We feel expansive. We participate in the world through our authentic selves. Now, it's one of the things I thought was really cool that he noted is this is not good or bad. This is not something to achieve. These emotional states are phasic, like the weather. I'm putting in air quotes. He describes it, but they also can be, again, this is his analogy, like a symphony where there's certain low tones and high tones being played at the same time. Some are standing out more because we can feel two emotions at once as humans. But the cool thing is, the more I've been able to apply the nervous system learning to this, and the more I've been able to consciously work with these emotional states, the more my baseline mood has improved. And when it gets thrown off, I have the tools to return to it. Now, this spiritual paradigm, that's where I think I was at 15 and why it felt so different.
I was just listening there.
Yeah.
You're at the spiritual paradigm. I'm wondering how you transcend through the scale, but it sounds like you're up and down on it at different times.
Oh, yeah. I'll also note that he describes that the spiritual masters around whom modern religions formed, so like the Buddha and Jesus, existed at the very top of this scale. This like ineffable place that we as normal human beings can't relate to, but in that place, things do come through us in this way that's probably teachable and meaningful and universally true and helpful for human beings. But the more fundamentalist any particular religious sect is, the more those teachings are being interpreted from the lower half of the scale. So the shame, guilt, fear. So that helped me understand a lot of context of, I think, the world that we live in at the moment, global violence, United States politics, all these are things that are going on. But it just gave me a lens to understand how something can be both, if that makes sense. And it's really just our own state that it's being interpreted through, what it can manifest as or become.
Yeah, we can be surrounded by the lower part of the map, the ego, the shame, the guilt, but how we're expressing is actually our experience.
And how this is Yes.
Fortunately for us, we're not screwed.
We're not stuck. No. And how this is developed, I listened to your episode from, I think it was a few weeks ago with Bradley Nelson. This was developed through muscle testing, which I understand that you have some training in.
That was my initial training, was actually that right out of college. It was interesting. It was like, it's funny. I grew up in a bit of a holistic household, like in a very different way from which I practice now. But we didn't go to the doctor when we had a cold or anything. My mom pulled out her homeopathy kit. So my parents were like folk medicine people, very much like into the stuff that's very popular now, homesteading stuff. And so I had that as part of my foundations. And so when I went to school, I thought I would learn more about holistic medicine, nutrition. You do not learn about that at all in school. And I remember the man I was dating, who's now my husband, I'd never seen a chiropractor ever in my life, but he had told me, you should go to this training. And it's so funny to look back and realize I had no concept that people were into integrative and functional medicine at that time. I didn't even know what that was. And this was the step before I met those dietitians and nutritionists in that space. I was thrown into a pool of chiropractors, mostly with muscle testing. So I was exposed to that at the very beginning of my career. And what I take from it is that there's a lot of common concepts among successful practices, is what I take from that.
Cool. Yeah. Do you use muscle testing for anything in your practice? Or
No, and the company I was learning it from, I found to be a fairly toxic company. And so it didn't really resonate. There were some things about it that I didn't really resonate with, and just some of the ways it was being presented. Do I think it's a valid tool? Totally. I think it can be subjective. And the way I was taught to use it, or the kind of the methodology I was taught in, there was like this never endingness to it that was like, come in, get like a ton of supplements, then come back and get more supplements. And so that wasn't really like a model. And there was no explanation. I always like to understand things. I'm a questioner. So I like to understand things. And so it wasn't a model. I was like, I don't want to use this model type thing. And everyone's got a different experience with it. So it may make more sense. I share that because it might make more sense on like why I didn't pursue that.
I really appreciate that angle. I haven't heard it that way. And I can see how that would almost feel manipulative, maybe.
It was a bit.
Like,
there was definitely like I felt like there was a lot of ego in that room. And it was like, you don't have to explain how it works. It just works. And I was like, okay, whatever.
Interestingly, so Dr. Nelson on the call that you did with him explained the caveat of it might not work if you have an attachment to a certain. He gave an anecdote about thinking he was going. And another caveat related to the map of consciousness is if the tester is on the lower half of the scale,
Yeah.
it work.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the folks that you might have been with, if they were in a lack mentality or a state of wanting a certain outcome, desire, that type of thing.
Yeah, it can be
I don't know,
skewed.
just
right?
interesting. Yeah.
It is
Yeah, it can be
interesting.
skewed. Yeah.
Would you repeat what you said Dr. Nelson said the caveat was? Because you cut out right there and I don't want us to miss that.
Yes. He shared an anecdote about when his wife was pregnant, and I think he had a dream that he was going to have a daughter. And when he muscle tested the gender of the baby, it kept coming up girl, and then it was a boy. And I think he shared that story just to say that when we have to be impartial, if we're going to muscle test something about ourselves, personal life, and when he realized afterwards that, is that he was not impartial. He wanted his dream to be.
Well, and this is a big deal because we are operating in the world through our biases. And the most fun thing I'm doing in practice right now is a coaching model where we're exploring current thoughts, beliefs, and then shifting those, because without it, like, you can't shift the biochemistry the way you want. Like, you can make it, you can change it, but it's not going to work for a long time. Like, you're going to be stuck in this. And then people get pissed because their lab tests look the same. They felt better, but then it's like you retest these mineral levels. Looks the same as, it's because you haven't changed anything inside your body, the way you're processing emotion. So anyway, the point of me saying that and where that all came from is that one of my observations is that we think our beliefs and our thoughts are facts, right? So we have all these biases.
Oh, totally.
We just think that they're facts.
Yes.
Dr. Brad was probably like, it's totally a girl. Like, he probably just thought that was a fact.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
It's such an easy example. Sometimes it's a bit different. Okay. I'm looking at this map of consciousness. And you brought up that the ego is at the bottom. And it might be that there's a lot of different maps out there on how to look at this. And I agree with you. Like, it's there, but the word isn't there. And I
there are a bunch of different visuals of this out there. I pulled up this one in particular because I find it the most helpful, but I've been working with this for years now. Yes. There are some that label, the one that I'm looking at right now has the lower half called the survival paradigm. Mm-hmm. That's what is called like the egoic half of the scale. And the upper half on here is called reason and integrity or spiritual paradigm. That's the part that is called the authentic self.
I love that. I like to make sure we highlight that because I think linguistics are very interesting. For example, I'll give you a very medical version. If I ask someone if they have heartburn, they may not resonate with that. I get to ask them if they have indigestion, burping, heartburn, like a variety of things, because they may not resonate with that word. So similarly, like survival may not be the same resonant word as ego. And if you're very unconscious of things, neither of these words will resonate with you. I too I'm developing a major love of consciousness, which is why I'm delighted we're talking about this, because it's like, there's all these concepts are out there that are not, I think, new, but people present them in different ways. And some people are like, this is my proprietary process. And I'm like, that's fine. No big deal. Everyone can have those things, but they've already existed in some other version almost. So anyway, just interesting that it could be survival or egoic and spiritual reason or authentic, I think you said.
Yep.
I don't know where you were with it. If you wanted to go over the chart more.
So let me jump into, I'm going to shift to tools and pitfalls and then blend some polyvagal stuff into that, if that's okay with you. I love to share practical applications.
Yeah. You also said you got stuck in this chart at one point.
Yes.
So
that's going to be part of this next step. This is my favorite of the David Hawkins books I've read just because it goes into practical tools the most. It's called Letting Go, the Pathway of Surrender. I'm going to share what I like and I'm going to share where I got stuck. So the process of letting go, as he describes it, is, I'm going to start with an analogy. He talks about our mind almost as like a filing cabinet. And each of these emotions has its own drawer with a varying number of memories that carry different emotional intensities. And when we get triggered, these old emotions are what's getting stirred up. So the letting go process is to be able to pause and say, wow, gosh, like that thing made me feel shame or made me feel guilt. Instead of just like writing it off as a bad mood and jumping into an addiction, which is, I think, an addiction can be just like opening up our phone. It doesn't have to mean alcohol, something like that. But when we can pause and become consciously aware of it without trying to resist it, which is hard, it can start to dissipate. Where I got stuck, though, is that I believe I had too much of my own quote unquote survival stress still stuck in my body. And this is where the nervous system learning came into play. So I'm going to switch to a nervous system analogy that's been really helpful for me. Are you familiar with Irene Ryan?
Yes.
You come across the work at all? Okay. Are you familiar with her beach ball analogy?
Uh-uh.
Nope.
I haven't really binged any of her stuff.
And these things might not just be like abuse, neglect, et cetera. It's loss of loved ones. It's chronic busyness. It's chronic feeling like we're not enough without being able to recognize the belief patterns underneath that. What she describes is as we're able to move the big beach balls out of the pool, all of a sudden the smaller ones can move around a bit better. And we have capacity to deal with things in our day-to-day life. And then it becomes a lot easier on our own to start working through some of those smaller things. So the methods for removing the bigger beach balls, this is where absolutely see a mental health professional. I found EMDR to be really helpful because it gets into our somatic selves. It gets into bilateral stimulation of our body in a way that helps us reprocess and then release the emotional intensity associated with certain events. So once I had that on board, I was able to have the Dr. David Hawkins tools work a lot better because my body had released this big amount of survival stress. Now, Irene Ryan also, the way she describes, it's very similar to the letting go process, but she calls it orienting. And I would love your feedback on this in your learning. But with nervous system learning, I find that a lot of content talks about, quote, calming down or resetting the nervous system, which to me is more of a short-term thing. Whereas the long-term thing is to build capacity to be able to sit with discomfort. Love your thoughts on that. And I can go into a little bit more.
I've arrived at that on my own
Okay.
That's how people think if we zoom out a bit, people are like, they think the goal is removing stress all the time. And it's really resilience to it is how I would describe it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Orienting is rather than having to, and it's great to have tools for when we get thrown off and when we feel anxious. Absolutely. And I know you're a breathwork practitioner. That is not my wheelhouse. But in terms of orienting, the gist of it is that when we feel good, when we feel regulated and that we're already in that rest digest state, is to pause and feel the surface that we're sitting on or standing on beneath our body, take in details around the room that we might ordinarily miss because we're just in our head going through our day, engage as many of the senses as possible. And she mentions tuning into the breath without trying to change it. And I think the whole point of that is really just to pause and see where you're at. And then this is a skill that, as boring as it may sound, when we build this muscle over time, when we feel good, we have a really solid skill on board for when we do feel triggered. And that's when we can start to have this letting go process getting momentum and actually work. And that filing cabinet I talked about in the beginning with the different emotions that are stuck in each drawer with different levels of intensity, that's where they start to be able to go away and dissipate. So that next time something happens that could make us feel angry, we have less of that intensity, or guilty, we have less of that intensity. So for me, that's how over time, my baseline mood has become so much better. And my ability to return to that state when I get thrown off has drastically improved as well.
Yeah. This is neuroplasticity 101. It's
Absolutely.
It's really the flexibility to shift between it's another way to describe it that I just love this expression and I'm using it and like really working on it is like the responding and not reacting.
Yeah, which in the beginning for me was so much easier said than done because my neural loop, what I had, and my reactions for so long went away. One thing that I say, and myself saying so much is these things, are they simple in some ways? Yes, they're not easy, but they're very worth it. It's a long-term thing. Another thing that I'll mention, I'm sure this is something that perhaps you've touched on at some point in these episodes, but taking it slow with this kind of work, for me at least, and I think for most people, is so important.
I agree. But I talk about neuroplasticity early on in programming. I think for people, sometimes it's hard to find a thing and then adopt it regularly because an overstimulated person already has so many things going on. So what advice do you give to that person who's have a real passion for people who are in this unrealized state? Consciousness is like a word that doesn't even resonate with my person. I feel so compelled to love and support and help them because I was that person. It's like you have unrealized stress and you're just going from thing to thing. And it's like, the hell is consciousness? Or it's like,
for sure. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing when it starts to shift. Just today, one of the people in my breathwork session said, I think because we did a breathwork session on your ideal day, And I thought this was the most beautiful thing. I just decided my ideal day is connecting more to my body. And that's a really big thing that some of my very disconnected people have said is I'm just up in my head all the time, right? Just logically running around and pretty disconnected to my body, numbing, dissociated, right? Trying to multitask, right? All those things. It speaks to me in a language I understand.
And you use the word overstimulated. That has been my number one biggest postpartum challenge. So I love that you brought that up. I think it's very common.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you say to the woman that's nice, but I don't have time to like brush my hair or take a shower, or get out of my pajamas right now? If you're urinating a lot when you're drinking water, maybe you're not actually hydrating that much, or in other words, getting the fluid and nutrients into the cell. Electrolytes are minerals that help fluid and nutrients get into the cell. I recommend all of my clients start by drinking electrolytes when we begin our work together to improve energy. And then we get even more strategic with our electrolyte recommendations as test results come in. Now, generally, electrolytes are potassium, sodium, and chloride. One of my favorite electrolyte products is Pickleball Cocktail from Jigsaw Health, because it's one of the only products you can get with an adequate dose of potassium to meet my recommendations, which is critical for blood sugar, which everyone should care about, hormone health, and digestion. Huge thing for relapsing digestive issues. Jigsaw Health is also maker of the famous adrenal cocktail, made popular by the pro-metabolic corner of the internet and Root Cause Protocol, as well as a multi-mineral electrolyte for recovery called Electrolyte Supreme. You can get a discount on all of Jigsaw's amazing products, including Pickleball, Electrolyte Supreme, and Adrenal Cocktail at jigsawhealth.com with the code LESSSTRESSED10. That's 3 S's, LESSSTRESSED10.
I love that you asked that, because I do have a couple of what I think of as like the least effort, highest reward things that I think anyone can implement right off the bat. This is very common, and I didn't know this until pretty recently. High frequency sounds, so children's voices, can be a lot. In my office, it's a handpiece. I learned about these little guys. They're called flare calmers. Are you familiar with this?
No, I got an Instagram ad one day for basically an earplug, an expensive earplug for this very reason.
Yeah.
What did you call them?
Flare calmer, FLARE. Yeah. So they're $25 on Amazon. They tune out high frequency pitches without blocking sound. And it's made such a difference in my baseline, like my threshold of when the overstimulation limit gets hit.
Oh, that's good. Because my middle child knows that I find high-pitched sounds annoying. So she sits around and expresses high-pitched sounds. It's really exciting for me. Yeah, thank you for this. Bet. What in the hell are you doing? And if you say it, she's going to do it more because she's the second born.
Yeah.
And they are, I don't know. I love birth order stuff, but like some kids like to, and she doesn't necessarily, I think there's a whole self-soothing thing there too, and she probably doesn't know why she's doing it. So I got to control myself.
Yeah.
First.
Yeah, totally.
Very good. High frequency pitches.
Yeah. High frequency pitches. So it's helped me a ton. And then have you had anyone talk about earthing and grounding, or are you familiar with that much? Okay. My husband's German. And for years, we would go to the beach and he would say, other people go surfing and I go earthing. You go walk around barefoot on the sand. And he would just talk about how great he felt. But we really didn't know the science behind it until a few years ago. There's a free movie on YouTube called The Earthing Movie that I really enjoyed. And what's that? Exactly. So his book, exactly. So I now sleep grounded, and I have for about 3.5 years. I bought a mat from Clint Ober's company. It allows the same science to happen, which is our bodies have a positive charge. The earth has a negative charge. The electrons from the earth are neutralizing free radicals in our body to bring down inflammation. So this can go a long way with mood, with hormone balance, with cardiac health. One of my favorite studies that's been done about earthing, I don't know if you've seen this, but it's like a picture of what people's blood cells look like before and after 40 minutes of being grounded. And it goes from clumpy to being like fine, like smooth and flowy, which is remarkable. And my personal story with earthing was that I'll never know if this was for sure a factor, but I think it was. I had really irregular periods and I struggled with infertility before our first child. And the second time around, I started sleeping grounded and I got pregnant the first month I slept grounded. And I don't know if that's a factor, but
I'll have to try again and see.
Yeah. There you go. But those would be my 2 tools for someone who feels what you're describing.
You mean tuning out high-pitched noises and then grounding?
Yeah, you said for a woman who would say
Somebody.
to these other tools, oh, yeah, I would love to have the time to do this, but I don't have time. These are two
Right. I
things
love
that
when you can
don't take
automate
time.
something, right? This didn't require you to do any time. You
No.
might have to buy something, right? That's the option.
Yes.
Do you have time or money?
Yes.
And I think there's all kinds of perspectives around both of those things, right? There's lack mentality for sure, but it's desperation can create money sometimes for people, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, yeah, there's a ground. So I had an engineer say to me, I was talking to him, I've had some interesting stories about grounding sheets, people just feeling more awake than they have, et cetera. And then I had an engineer who I wanted to try this, and he was like, I'm not sure that's going to work without a grounded outlet into copper, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, I wish I had the right expert to ask this question about. Do you have any comments about some of these?
So I can't explain the exact science behind a grounded outlet, but the mats that you buy from this company come with a thing that you can plug into the wall and see if your outlet is grounded. And it has a certain way it lights up if it's correct or incorrect. So when we went to Germany, we went for 2 weeks to visit my husband's family in June, and I brought the tester with me in a small earthing mat, not knowing if it would work because I'm using an outlet converter. And if I had the outlets, a lot of their outlets, ours are this way, theirs were this way. If I put the converter in the wall one way, or it would show that it was grounded, and if I put it in this way, it would show it was not grounded. So I don't know how.
And probably
there
not
is a way
every
to
company
test
has that option. I think it's
Correct.
actually easy testing. The embarrassing part is my dad was an electrician, so I should know this stuff, but not that I learned anything from him.
Okay. You're not an electrician.
Exactly. So it's just, since you brought it up, I'm curious. But I want to iterate what you said. That's the conversation, that inflammation is positive electrons and the earth is negative electrons. And so we're getting to this neutral state, right? That's how I understand it anyway.
Yeah.
As well. I would love to look at this study of the cells looking clumpy versus flowy.
I have it on my blog. I took it from another site and I have them cited, but I have a earthing article. Yeah. With the blood. Yeah. I can send you the link if you'd like after we get off today.
Perfect. Okay. We started with the map of we started with your story. We've got this interesting apparent experience of consciousness at age 15 that you remember over a decade later. And then you get introduced by your holistic therapist to consciousness, Dr. David Hawkins. And I don't know, I wonder how he developed that.
So I can go into that a little bit. He had this experience as a child where it was very similar to what I had, and he ended up becoming a psychiatrist to try to figure it out. And as much success as he had within the realm of science, it wasn't until he learned a lot about, I think, ancient spiritual wisdom and tried to blend the two that he made progress with mapping the entire human emotional experience.
Interesting. Okay. Then we talked about a little bit of Iron Lion, the filing cabinet, the beach ball conversation. You shared a couple things that are just great for the overstimulated woman with this unrealized stress. Maybe the person who finds herself a bit reactive. The earplugs.
I've been there, by the way. Relatable. Yes.
Yes, totally. And I think that's the thing, is I really want to connect these women to these right tools, right? So it's like they can do anything to bring themselves into a better place as soon as possible. I don't think we covered this. I think we started talking about those tools, and you mentioned how you got stuck somewhere in the chart, but I don't remember the answer to that.
Yes. So with trying to let go of emotions on my own, I hit a wall where I couldn't do it until I had done EMDR. That was what really got some of that deeper, visceral, somatic stress out of my system. And that's where I can't recommend highly enough seeing a professional. And EMDR, I don't know if anybody has talked about that on your podcast, but it's a way to reprocess traumatizing memories in a way that gets into the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the body at the same time.
Before you were doing EMDR and you were working on releasing emotions on your own, you became conscious of it with some of this work we've talked about. How were you working on that on your own before?
Really just trying to follow the advice from the Letting Go book, which is when something would come up, like a typical thing would be like people in the dental office are just the patients we see every day. And it would happen so often that someone would make a comment, a patient, or maybe even a coworker that had nothing to do with me. And I'd go home and that because of it. Mm-hmm. So what I couldn't do before was just sit with it and be like, what is it that I'm feeling? Usually it would go to like irritation. Sometimes it would go to guilt. And then I try to think, is there a reason why? And I wouldn't always come up with anything, but being able to pause and let that emotion be did help. The difference with having EMDR on board is that most of the time I don't even get triggered in the first place now. which is so cool. All this effort for all these years. Now people can say things or do things. And I feel relatively immune to other people's thoughts and opinions.
That is such a sexy statement, Jen. I'm immune to other people's thoughts and opinions. How amazing. Like that's the name of your future job. How to become immune to other people's thoughts and opinions.
I didn't come up with that. It's from the 4 agreements. I used to read that. My sister and I both have had the 4 agreements as the background portion.
Oh, that's such a good idea. That's a really good idea.
Yeah. And that one was the hardest one for me. I would read it and be like, gosh, that sounds great.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's such a good point because I listened to the 4 agreements twice and I was like, oh, this is good. And I agree with you. I always suggest to people, like, put something in the front of your face. Speaking of an absolutely useless quick sidebar, sometimes I put inspirational things on the background of my phone and my second child with that high-pitched noise changes it to grilled cheese, a photo she took. And it takes me a while to notice she switched it back to grilled cheese. Absolutely irrelevant, stupid side note, but parenting is a whole different beast.
I have a similar anecdote, which has nothing, but it's very similar. So I'm going to share it. My second child, who's my youngest, who's 2.5, has figured out how to change both of our screen backgrounds and changes it to pictures of himself.
Yeah. Oh, I think kids do that actually all the time. She used to do that all the time before. This grilled cheese now, I think she's like it. Very funny. You are funny, but you're a pain in my butt. Oh, funny. Okay. I love the question. One of my favorite questions of all time is, if this was easy, what would it look like? And I feel that you answered that with, how were you releasing emotions on your own? It's, I'm just observing that instead of, because busyness is a bit of just a distraction from what we're currently doing. And so that's where it doesn't sound sexy to the overstimulated, unrealized stress person to slow down, but it's more like, have you noticed how you were feeling today? What did you feel like? And that's the thing is, I will tell you if this is you, and it was me 100,000,000%, usually other people can see it on you before you. Not that it matters, but I see it on my clients. I'm like, I wonder how I could express this to you and it would land the right way. Because I've also been through the experience of telling people that they're stressed and that backfiring pretty amazingly too. That didn't help at all. To tell them that. There was a different book you held up besides Letting Go.
Yes, thank you. This is awesome. This is going to, I think, leave hopefully people with something hopeful. Or at least that's what I got out of this book. Eckhart Tolle had this kind of experience when he was about 28 and it stayed. He stayed in this. He transcended his own ego and stayed in this really peaceful state for the rest of his life. I want to say he's in his early 60s now. He's most known for a book called The Power of Now. This is my favorite of his books. It's called A New Earth. So consciousness, people who write about it and teach about it, talk about it as if we have our individual consciousness, but we also have a collective consciousness, all human beings and probably all living things that's somehow intertwined. And I think a lot of people who are spiritual or have delved into this at all sense it, but they might not know how to articulate that. So what he describes is there is this phenomenon happening that's been happening now for a few decades, but it's speeding up, where people are, quote unquote, waking up to, gosh, an ego is a thing that I have, or I have this negative voice in my head is a thing that I don't have to have, and trying to figure out what to do about it. And that over time, as more and more people land themselves in that upper half of the scale more often, there will be this tipping point that we reach as a human society where ego dominance dissolves. I think that's happening. I think that American politics and all the, especially things that have happened globally, violence last few years, fortunately and unfortunately, he describes it as things are going to look really worse, a lot worse before they start to dissipate. And then humans hopefully will be able to live in a much more cohesive way than we ever. So who knows? I don't know, but this is something that I feel, and I feel like I sense it. And I felt like when the pandemic was happening and 2020 was unfolding, I hadn't read this yet, but I had read enough of his other stuff to think it feels so chaotic, but maybe it's leading us somewhere good. And I really do believe.
I think that's such a beautiful place to end, because you're like, I think we're moving this way. I was like, are you sure? Like, things will look worse before they look better. Okay. Yes, we have heard this before. Very interesting. Eckhart Tolle's The Power of...
Eckhart Tolle. This is called... This one's called A New Earth.
A New Earth. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know where
and I have a summary of it on my blog if you want to just get like quick highlights from it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Jen, where can people find your writing and find you online?
Yeah. So I've been publishing content since the spring. I did it anonymously at first. I had a lot of mental blocks to get over, but it's grounded-now.com. And just in the last few weeks, I started an Instagram account. It's grounded now with Dr. Jen with periods between all of the words. So my blog's no longer anonymous. I am a life coach. I am not actively taking people in until my kids are in the flow of the school year. So probably 6 to 8 weeks from now. But if you'd like to do what I call a discovery call, just to have a, hey, what's your biggest struggle? And if I can help you, direct you toward one or two resources to get you unstuck, awesome. Just shoot me an email if you're interested in that. Grounded.now.contact@gmail.
Perfect. Thanks so much for coming on today.
I appreciate it.
Bones, but they just keep breaking.